Banning crypto may not be the best way of mitigating the associated risks, the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, said in a new blog post out yesterday. That position is in pretty stark contrast to statements from the supranational organization made just months ago, purportedly because a full ban would also prevent countries gaining what the IMF describes as the associated benefits. Quote, while a few countries have completely banned crypto assets given their risks, this approach may not be effective in the long run, the IMF said. Continuing, the region should instead focus on addressing the drivers of crypto demand, including citizens' unmet digital payment needs, improving transparency by recording crypto asset transactions in national statistics, end quote. Power players like the IMF increasingly can't ignore the interest from nations who do not benefit from the dollar reserve system as it exists today, but can essentially take no position except to assume that it's a technology question. That is, the interest here is in better technology without really changing anything else. When really, if you get down to it, it's typically a question of who has power in the system, which is not these smaller nations that are interested. Zach, what do you think?
I mean, I think this is an interesting signal about sort of co-option, right? Like maybe we should try to co-opt this thing rather than outright ban this thing, right? And whatever the read is, or however misguided that read may be, according to some folks, that's sort of what I see as the essential message here. Is okay, this is a technology that's addressing a potentially unmet need in the world, whether that's more efficient payment rails or the ability to rampantly speculate on various assets. They're saying, okay, maybe we should, instead of being fearful and, shutting this thing down, we should figure out how we best co-opt some of these ideas into existing systems that power the traditional financial world. And I think that's a perfectly fine response that the IMF is taking here, right? They're saying, okay, there's some unsavory aspects of this, but let's assume, at least in good faith, that there's some parts of this suite of technologies that make sense for people the world over. How do we build that into the existing current financial system? And I think that's why you see that this research is couched in the terms of CBDCs, right? How do we make more efficient, digital fiat currencies? So, interesting that sort of the ban approach that, the ban, which is always sort of a squishy ban, we should just mention, the ban approach by China is sort of not aging well. I think is interesting to watch the IMF also voice here. But the idea to me is like, how do we co-opt this technology such that we aren't unseated potentially by this emerging crop of things? But yeah, this is going to be a long one to play out. It's good to see that the IMF is thinking about it at least. Jen, what do you think?
Given this report, I would love to hear if the IMF's stance on Bitcoin in El Salvador has changed. But on the CBDC point, I think this report is interesting because they say, we shouldn't outright ban crypto. Crypto can solve some of the problems that people have. And then they look at countries in a bunch of different jurisdictions, one of those jurisdictions being Latin America. And I think that we've seen crypto adoption in Latin America largely because of the central bank failures of the governments of those countries. And I don't think that CBDCs solve that problem. And so I read this report and I feel that there are gaps in the report. If we're saying we shouldn't ban cryptocurrencies because CBDCs solve the problem, well, I think we're kind of missing the point. Adam?
Yeah, I'll go back to a horse analogy here, which is, again, this is the IMF, which currently operates the horse cart, transportation system, saying, okay, we acknowledge that motors make sense, that it actually is okay if you put an engine on something, but we still require and think that you should make sure not to remove the horse from your system, right? So you're going to have an engine on the back of your thing that makes it so you don't need a horse, but we still want you to have a horse because our whole business is based around horses and we can't change. So just create this system that actually doesn't make any sense because it's better for us, right? Like it's not a strong argument. None of these arguments are strong. And Zach, to your earlier point, the IMF has been saying versions of this for coming up on 3 years now. The World Bank gets involved too, the Bank for International Settlements, all of these big companies, right? These big supranational organizations that kind of just sit on top of the global dollar system. Like they don't want anything to change, but they also can't say that. They can't be like, hey, we're concerned this competes with us, right? Instead, they have to figure out a way to be like, it's kind of almost like concern trolling, right? They're like, well, I really don't want you to do this thing, but I know if I tell you not to do this thing, you're not going to listen to me. So instead, let me just pretend like I really care about you and I'm concerned you're making a bad choice, right? In reality, the concern is truly at the level of the IMF, not at the level of these nations who are presented with an option that they typically don't have and which apparently, at least some of them prefer. So it's interesting. We have a story after the break that I think is going to tie right back into all of this. Jen?
Well, Adam, I just have to say, every time you bring up a horse analogy, I just appreciate it so much. I love that you bring them to the show, and so keep doing that. And I know I always call for special graphics, but I think that now is the time that we get like a horse when you do that, that maybe we can like pop up in the corner. I don't know if we have the capabilities to make it gallop across the screen, but we can work on that.
It's going to be great. It's going to be great. I'm into it. Okay.
Was that a Knights of Knee reference there, Adam?
Yes. It's a Monty Python.
We're galloping along.